Hello everyone, let us continue our lecture or our discussion on the theories of international trade. So previously we discussed mercantilism, absolute advantage, and comparative advantage. We also discussed the different assumptions on comparative advantage. And speaking of your assumptions on comparative advantage, there are economists or some economists argued that once all assumptions are dropped, okay, the case of unrestricted free trade, while still positive, has been associated with a new trade theory to lose some of its strength. So, in a recent and widely discussed analysis, okay, the Nobel Prize award-winning economist Paul Samuelson argued that, contrary to the standard interpretation, in certain circumstances, the theory of comparative advantage predicts that a rich country might actually be worse off by switching to a free trade regime with a poor nation. So, in addition to that, according to Samuelson, the ability to offshore service jobs that were traditionally not internationally mobile may have the effect of a mass inward migration into the United States, where wages would then fall. So, according to him, if constituents of a rich country benefits from lower cost of consumption due to international trade, it has an adverse effect to the domestic producer, or wherein it will not offset the loss of these producers. So, for example, embracing a free trade regime for an advanced economy such as the United States often implies that the country will produce less of some labor-intensive goods, such as textiles, and more of some knowledge-intensive goods, such as computer software or biotechnology products. Although the country as a whole will gain from such shift, textile producers will lose. A textile worker in South Carolina is probably not qualified to write software for Microsoft. Thus, the shift to free trade may mean that she or he becomes unemployed or has to accept another less attractive job, such as working as at a fast food restaurant. Okay. Another theory is the theory of Heckscher, okay, and Olin. Let's take a look at their theories. So, Eli Heckscher and Bertil Ohlin propose that the reason for a country's comparative advantage is because of the differences in factor endowment. So, countries, okay, would export more goods and use resources that are highly abundant in the country and import goods that uses resources where a country is less abundant. So these are the theories of Heckscher and Olin. Theory of relative factor endowments. So factor endowments vary among countries. Products differ according to the types of factors that they need as inputs. A country has a comparative advantage in producing products that intensively use factors of production, such as your resources, where it has in abundance. And factors of production would include labor, capital, land, human resources, and of course, technology. Okay, next, let's take a look at Leontief paradox. So, Heckscher and Olin's theory is basically widely accepted by economists in terms of international trade. That is, countries export products where they have abundance of factor endowments. But in reality, Leontief paradox exists in international trade. So Wassily Leontief studied and assumed that since the US is abundant in capital resources than other nations, it is therefore safe to assume that US will be exporting more of capital-intensive goods and less of import of capital-intensive goods. So what is the conclusion for this? So US imports more capital-intensive goods than its export. So the explanation for this is that, okay, US has a special advantage in producing new products made with innovative technologies. So they import capital-intensive products for them to increase the efficiency of their production. In Heckscher and Olin's theory, the assumption is that, okay, technology is the same in all countries. Yan, factor of endowments lang ang may difference, kaya ganyan ang nangyari sa US. Okay, let's take a look at the product life cycle theory. So Raymond Vernon initially proposed the product life cycle theory in mid-1960s. So Vernon's theory was based on the observation that for most of the 20th century, a large proportion of the world's new products had been developed by US firms and sold first in the US market. Okay, like for example, mass-produced automobiles, what else? Televisions, okay, instant cameras, photocopiers, personal computers, okay, ano pa ba? Semiconductor chips, okay, etc. So to explain this, Vernon argued that the wealth and size of the US market gave US firms a strong incentive to develop new consumer products. So as US introduce a new product, US tend to sell inside its territory first, okay? And only few rich people in other countries would buy the product, right? In advanced countries, they tend to import from US or from the US during the early stage of the product. But due to the increase in demand, they tend to create their own product after this. So they tend to compete with the US and other advanced countries with the use of price. So sometimes mas mura yung kanila kaysa sa produkto ng US. Okay, so in the early stage of the product, constituents of developing countries, okay, are not considered as a demand due to the reason that they have a relatively low income bracket. As stiff competition happens in a global arena, like for example the US and other countries, they will try to penetrate developing countries in which the developing countries will not produce the new technology. Okay. So let's try to consider, for example, photocopiers. Okay. So the product was first produced or developed in the early 1960s by Xerox in the United States and sold initially to US users. That's the first stage, okay, in the US. What happens next is that originally, Xerox exported photocopiers from the United States, primarily to Japan and advanced countries of Western Europe. But as demand began to grow in other countries, Xerox entered into joint venture to set up production in Japan. Okay, yan, exports. They exported product to Japan. Okay, and then what? They ventured, they had a joint venture. Kaya naging Fuji Xerox. And Great Britain, ano naman sa kanila? Rank Xerox. Okay, in addition, once Xerox's patent on the photocopier process expired, other foreign competitors began, okay, to enter the market. Like, for example, Canon in Japan and Olivetti in Italy. Okay, so as a consequence, exports from the United States declined, and US, okay, users began to buy other of their photocopiers from lower cost foreign sources, particularly, of course, Japan. So more recently, Japanese companies have found that manufacturing costs are too high in their own country, so they began to switch production to developing countries such as, okay, Singapore and Thailand. Thus, initially, the United States and other advanced countries, example Japan and Great Britain, have switched from being the exporters of the photocopiers to importers. So this evolution in the pattern of international trade in photocopiers is consistent with the prediction of the product life cycle theory that matures industries, okay, or mature industries tend to go out of the US and into low-cost assembly. Okay. All right. So that is the theory of product life cycle. So, this is now the theory of your product life cycle. So, ang nangyari dito was that, okay, originally, okay, in terms of photocopy machine, Xerox, yun, pag-aari siya ni US. So, they sell or binenta nila sa Japan at saka sa Britain yung kanilang product. Pero as demand increases, what happened was that US placed manufacturing facilities in both countries, in Japan and Britain. Kaya lang, ayun, parang nagkaroon sila ng joint venture. Kaya nagkaroon ng Fuji Xerox or Xerox and then Rang Xerox. Kaya lang nung expired yung patent ng Xerox, okay, Japan and other countries took this opportunity to create their own photocopying machine. Kaya nagkaroon ng Canon Japan. Ayan. Tapos, as demand increases, nakita ni Japan na ang pag-produce sa kanilang country ay mahal. Okay. The cost of producing the photocopier in their country is actually very high. So as a result, anong ginawa nila? They transferred their manufacturing facilities to developing countries. And anong nangyari? These developing countries now created their own version of photocopier. So, okay. So that is the product life cycle theory. Okay, let's continue. Next. Okay. Next, let us try now to take a look at the issues that was raised or issues that were raised against the PLC or the product life cycle theory. Number one is that not all products are invented and started its production in the United States. Another is that new products are most of the time simultaneously introduced globally. And then finally, new product components and the products being produced or they are being produced in different countries. Okay, now let's proceed to the new trade theory. Okay, so basically the new trade theory began to emerge in 1970s when a number of economists pointed out that the ability of a firm to attain economies of scale might have important implication for international trade. Okay. So it says here that the new trade theory deals with the returns on specialization where substantial economies of scale are present. And specialization increases output. Okay, that is the ability to enhance economies of scale to increase. So what is economies of scale? When we speak of economies of scale, okay, meaning to say you have the ability to spread fixed costs over a large volume, and you have the ability of the large volume producers to utilize specialized employees and equipment that are more productive than less specialized employees and equipment. Okay, that is your economies of scale. In addition to that, it says here that typically they requires industries with high fixed cost. So world demand, when you say world demand, we're talking about customers, will support few competitors. And competitors may emerge because they got there first. We call that your first mover advantage. First mover advantage are the economic and strategic advantage that accrue to early entrance into an industry. Okay, and some argue that it generates government intervention and strategic trade policy, right? Moreover, there are two important points, okay, that we have to remember. So it says here that, okay, the new trade theory makes two important points. First is, okay, through its impact on economies of scale. We already mentioned what economies of scale is. Okay, trade can actually increase the variety of goods available to consumers and decrease the average of those goods. Okay, another important point, the second important point is that in those industries, when the output requires to attain economies of scale, uh, presents a significant proportion of world demand or the total world demand. So the global market may be able to support only a small number of enterprise. Thus, world trade in certain products may be dominated by countries whose firms were there first in their production. Let's continue. So let's take a look at the case of Boeing and Airbus in terms of economies of scale, first mover advantages. Okay, so first mover advantages are the economic and strategic advantages, as we mentioned earlier, that accrue to early entrance into the industry. It is the ability to capture scale economies ahead of later entrants, thus benefit from lower cost structure. Okay, it is an important, so is an important first mover advantage rather. So, for example, consider the commercial aerospace industry. So, in aerospace, there are substantial scale economies that come from the ability to spread the fixed cost of developing a new jet aircraft over a large number of sales. So, it has cost Airbus industry some $15 billion to develop its new super jumbo jet, okay, that the 550 seat A380. Okay, so to recoup those costs and break even, Airbus will have to sell at least 250 A380 planes. If Airbus can sell more than 350 A380 planes, it will apparently be a profitable venture. So total demand over the next 20 years for this class of aircraft is estimated to be between 400 and 600 units. Thus, the global market can probably profitably support only one producer of jet aircraft in super jumbo category. It follows that, okay, European Union might come to dominate in the export of very large aircraft, primarily because a European-based firm, Airbus, was the first to produce a super jumbo jet aircraft and realize economies of scale. Okay, so first mover advantage are the economic and strategic advantage that accrue to early entrants. Other potential 195 producers, such as the Boeing, might be shut out of the market because they will lack the economies of scale that Airbus will enjoy. So by pioneering this market category, Airbus may have captured a first mover advantage yon based on economies of scale or scale economies that will be difficult for rivals to match, and that it will result in the European Union becoming the leading exporter of very large jet aircraft, okay, wherein Boeing does not believe the market to be large enough. That's why they did not produce a very large aircraft. Not even profitable to support one producer. Hence, its decision not to build a similar aircraft and instead focus its super efficient 787. Yon, that's the story, or that's behind Boeing and Airbus. Okay. All right. Now let's take a look at the national advantage or national competitive advantage, okay, or your Porter diamond. So Porter justified that the reason countries are more competitive over other countries is because of the presence of the four factors. We'll talk about that later on. So according to Michael Porter, the four factors must be present to a country to have a competitive advantage over the other countries. So what are these four factors? So we have here the firm, strategy, structure, and rival. We have demand, condition, related and supporting industries, and of course, factor endowments. Now, let's take a look at the four factors to determine national competitive advantage. Okay, first is your factor endowments. When we speak of your factor endowments in economics, it is commonly understood as your land or the amount of land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship that a country possesses, which can actually can be exploited for manufacturing. So, okay, first factor of the four factors would be factor endowments. So it says here that a nation's position in factor of production such as skilled labor or infrastructure necessary to compete in a given industry. So when we speak of the demand condition, we're talking about consumer based. How huge is your consumer based? So it talks about the nature of home demand, okay, for the industry's product or service. And then another is, okay, relating and supporting industries. We're talking about the presence or absence of supplier industries and related industries that are internationally competitive. So creating clusters of related industries. Okay. And then firm, strategy, structure, and rivalry. So the conditions governing how companies are created, organized, and managed, and nature of domestic rivalry. So Porter speaks of these four attributes as constituting the diamond. He argues that firms are more likely or most likely to succeed in industries or industry segments where the four or the diamond is most favorable. For example, in terms of demand condition, it is more favorable if you have huge consumer base. Okay. What else? He also argues that the diamond is mutually reinforcing system. The effect of one attribute is contingent on the state of others. For example, okay, Porter argues favorable demand condition will not result in competitive advantage unless, of course, the state of rivalry is sufficient to cause the firm to respond to them. So we'll end it here for now. In the meantime, okay, please do your homework. You can work with 5 members, okay, per group. In a group of 5 members, please try to illustrate and discuss the following international trade theories: your comparative advantage, absolute advantage, product life cycle, Porter's diamond. Moreover, kindly discuss, okay, Samuelson's critique on international trade pattern, Lontief paradox, and the new trade theory. Mas mainam kasi na aside from listening to the lecture, magbabasa din kayo para mas maintindihan nyo pa yung lecture natin. Okay, so your homework will be due next meeting. Okay, so please work per group with 5 members. You please submit in Word file, submit to my email, that is sdguillermo@uc-bcf.edu.ph. Okay? So, wala pong format. Basta importante, you try now to discuss. If there's an illustration, you illustrate and at the same time, discuss. Thank you very much. I'll see you in my next lecture.